Who is the lowest status person for whom you have the highest respect? Roberto, the janitor in the operating room where I work, embodies the essence of resilience and determination. He arrived in this country at the age of 17, clandestinely crossing over the wall from Mexico. Such is the irony of walls attempting to keep people out, but I digress. For 5 years, Roberto lived as an undocumented immigrant, working diligently in dishwashing jobs and gradually establishing his residency. Eventually, he found himself on the path to citizenship, a testament to his unwavering perseverance. In addition to his position at the hospital, Roberto tirelessly took up another cleaning job at a different healthcare facility. Balancing 2 full-time occupations, he strived to provide for his family. He married a woman of Mexican descent, and together, they joyfully welcomed the arrival of 2 children. With unwavering determination, Roberto is ensuring that both his kids have access to private education, enabling them to embody the quintessential American dream. His commitment to their future knows no bounds. A man of exceptional work ethic and intelligence, Roberto's presence positively impacts us all. His insatiable curiosity leads him to constantly seek knowledge about my field of work. He revels in the moments when I teach him techniques like patient intubation or elucidate the intricacies of ultrasound anatomy. Guided by the anesthesia tech, Roberto has eagerly shadowed her, absorbing valuable insights from her expertise. During her vacation periods, he willingly steps into the role of my tech, meticulously organizing and preparing my supplies each morning. The disparity between Roberto's position as a janitor and my role as a doctor is solely rooted in the divergent opportunities we were born into. I arrived in this country through legal means, privileged to benefit from an airplane journey. My parents bestowed upon me a comfortable middle-class upbringing, accompanied by access to excellent public education throughout my academic journey. However, make no mistake, Roberto toils with the same unwavering dedication as I do. His integrity radiates, earning my profound respect. His relentless work ethic is a shining example for all to behold. His intelligence shines through in every interaction we have. But above all, I hold him in the highest regard for being a model citizen and a devoted family man who has deftly navigated the path life has set before him. What's the worst thing you've seen at school? I was 11. There was a girl in my class who used to run to and from lessons in a full-out sprint, and my year group gave her hell for it. So one day my friend and I were walking back from class and the corridors were milling about with a handful of people from our previous lesson, heading to lunch. As if on cue, the girl came charging down the corridor past us. We were used to this by now, and had the misfortune to pass another 2 kids who seemed determined to make her life awful. They heard her coming and turned, laughing and shouting things like, "Where you going, Mia?" Then she reached them and it all happened really fast. They just grabbed her, the girl was tiny, and threw her into the corridor wall. The thud was super loud, I think they even might have knocked down a display, and Mia was on the floor, shocked and crying. She came to herself and started to run away. She was heading for a corner to hide in, I think. But before she could get there, an older boy, although he was a giant to us, began to mimic her run and shout some obscenity at her. The kids were in hysterics. But that's not the worst part. The kids had gone and Mia was hiding when a girl we liked and got one well with came up behind us, laughing. "Did you see what happened to Mia? That was awesome." I know it's not as huge as what other people might have seen, but seeing children be so vindictive and enjoying it really affected me. We looked after Mia at lunchtime and told our tutor about it, but he didn't really do anything. At that point, we still had another 5 years of this school, and it scared the hell out of me. Have you ever met an entitled celebrity who thinks you know them? And have you ever said no? In a way, but with a twist. I knew who she was, but she didn't want me to know. Our city is often used for filming movies. Canada fits the bill quite well for depicting many international locales. And I was working downtown at an outdoor clothing store, technical jackets, hiking gear, stuff like that, about 20 years ago. It was just before noon. I was dressing some mannequins on the main floor while my boss was out getting some lunch. In walks a very pretty brunette. I recognized her immediately as being Shannon Elizabeth, despite the sunglasses and ball cap. She was with a particularly large dude and a serious-looking lady, security detail. This happened a year after American Pie came out, so she was quite well known at that time. I'm no gusher, but wow, such a nice-looking girl. Hey, I was 24 and I saw American Pie, sue me. Anywho, she starts looking at the Gore-Tex shells and I called over, "If you need any sizes or have any questions, give me a shout." There were a few other people in the store, but no one paid any attention to her. Eventually she came over and asked me if I had one of the shells in a particular color and size. We walked over to the display and checked the bottom drawers underneath. We did have that color and size. I pulled it out and handed it to her. While I was pushing the drawer back in, and without looking up, I asked, "You filming over at the Customs House building? So many people on the sidewalks watching today." Silence. I glanced up. She had taken her sunglasses off and was staring at me with a smile. "You're good," she replied. "Well, you're kinda hard to miss," I said. I could feel my ears going red. We wandered the displays together for a couple of minutes talking. She also chose some new model hiking shoes that just came in. By that time, my boss was back from getting her sandwich. I introduced them. Hellos were exchanged. Boss had no idea who she was. She thought she was a friend of mine. We chatted for almost 10 minutes, even got stern bitch security lady to laugh. Shannon was planning on going hiking after the week was done before heading back to the US and was shopping in her downtime for basic rain gear. It rains often where I live. Been in town for 6 days, 2 more days to go. She got the jacket and the hikers. Stern lady got some stuff too. Nice sale overall. I got a friendly hug, and she left. What is the most satisfying thing you've seen happen to a Karen cutting in line? During the virus grocery hoarding time, prior to when they started putting limits on how much TP you could buy, I was at Sam's Club. I was about 5th or 6th in my line. This Karen came up behind me, huffing and puffing about the long lines and how she didn't have time for this. I carefully turned to see who this drama queen was and noticed she had at least 10 cases of TP. Just for reference, I had bought a case of this same TP right before the great TP shortage of 2020 and I just recently had to buy it again. Yes, a year it lasted me and my 2 kids. Karen decides she is just too important to have to wait in line, so just as an elderly lady stepped up to the register, Karen tries to bust in before her. The elderly lady tried nicely to explain that she was next, but Karen ignored her and moved right up to the register. After several tries at getting Karen to step out of the way, the elderly lady walks over to Karen, whacks her with her purse and tells Karen to move it. Karen then starts screaming that she was assaulted and she is going to sue the store, yada yada yada. Store manager comes over, gets the story from the cashier, and store manager tells Karen she must leave the store or he will call the police. Karen goes on and on about how her family needs this TP and refused to leave. Store security is called. One security officer takes her TP and walks in the back with it, the other tries to escort her out while she is screaming about lawsuits and TP. Somehow she gets loose from the guard and runs back over to the old woman saying, "I hope you're happy, you old bat. How is my family supposed to live without TP?" At which the elderly lady says, in the sweetest voice I've ever heard, "Oh honey, if your family need that much toilet paper, maybe you should spend your money on a doctor instead." I thought Karen's head was going to explode. It was awesome. Would you ever help a young child all by himself asking for help? I once was walking along the quiet streets where I would jog from time to time. I was out of breath from doing a sprint earlier, so I was walking rather slow. The next moment a crying boy came out of a house, around 6 years of age, walking straight to me and grabbing my leg. Shocked, I asked what was wrong, but no answer. He was crying but not talking. 3 more unsuccessful attempts to get him to talk, when I saw a slightly older girl came out to pick up the younger boy, appearing to be her brother. Her eyes were red and teary, too. I decided to probe a little. Initially no answers, but then the girl finally spoke, saying that they were told not to speak to strangers. I eventually got enough information out of the girl to realize I need to intervene. Their mom was sleeping and they could not wake her, and their food was burning on the stove, having caught fire. I used to be an EMT for about 14 months about 10 years prior, but I was unsure of the correct way to take out the fire because I was not sure what kind of fire it was. Not seeing a fire extinguisher, I inspected the fire and saw no spattering oil or electrical dangers, so I just grabbed their pet blanket, drenched it water and smothered the burning casserole with it after switching off the stove. Once the, rather small, fire was neutralized, the girl led me to her mother, who was unresponsive on the floor. She was breathing, but not reacting to stimuli. I had some experience in looking for signs of things out of place, and saw no visible narcotics or alcohol, no obvious injuries, and called out the local ambulance service. The ambulance arrived and I learned that the mom was injecting insulin, so I assumed that she had passed out due to diabetic complications. She was stabilized and taken to hospital while I waited with the kids for their grandmother to arrive. The grandmother confirmed my beliefs. Good ending, no harm done, just one casserole. Dish that must have been impossible to clean, but I was in awe that I was there at that exact time that family needed help in an otherwise very quiet street on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Amazing how things sometimes just work out. When was the last time you've ever been fully enraged? The last thing that truly outraged me happened just a few weeks ago. I was in the operating room performing a routine procedure on a patient, when I noticed one of the nurses on my team was being treated unfairly. The nurse in question was a young woman who had just started working at the hospital. She was intelligent, hardworking, and eager to learn. However, one of the more experienced nurses on the team was treating her with disrespect and condescension. At first, I tried to ignore it. I didn't want to create a scene in the middle of the surgery, and I hoped that the situation would resolve itself. But as the surgery progressed, the situation continued to escalate. The more experienced nurse was snapping at the younger nurse, criticizing her every move, and even making derogatory comments about her appearance. It was clear that she was trying to make the younger nurse feel small and inadequate. I couldn't take it anymore. I paused the surgery and addressed the situation directly. I told the more experienced nurse that her behavior was unacceptable, and that she needed to treat her colleagues with respect. The nurse was taken back by my reaction, but I didn't back down. I explained to her that we were all part of the same team, and that we needed to work together in order to provide the best care possible for our patients. Thankfully, my words seemed to have an impact. The more experienced nurse apologized to the younger nurse, and we were able to complete the surgery without any further incidents. Afterwards, I took some time to reflect on the situation. I was proud of myself for standing up for what was right, but I was also saddened by the fact that this kind of behavior still exists in the healthcare industry. As a surgeon, I know that I have a responsibility not only to my patients but also to my colleagues. It's up to all of us to create a culture of respect and collaboration in the operating room and beyond. And if we encounter situations like the one I experienced, we must speak up and demand better. Have you ever been inside the mafia? Twice actually. In high school, a friend's father, who was a low-level mafioso, hired me and a bunch of his kids' other friends to show up at an address in the Bronx, New York, at 8 a.m. on a Saturday. When we arrived, we learned it was an auction to sell the assets of a bankrupt business. We and many others like us were there to fill up the place so that when the legitimate buyers showed up for the 9 a.m. auction, they could be turned away by a bribed fire marshal. It was addicting, to be honest, and I don't know what would happen if I'd spent any more time with them. My friend's father and his buddies won every lot sold with very low bids. When my father owned a store on 5th Avenue in New York in the 1960s, police officers, firefighters, building inspectors, etc. had to be bribed. It was just considered a cost of doing business. But commercial trash collection was not done by the city, it was done by mafia-authorized collectors who simply informed you that they would be collecting your trash, period. The ironic part is that they were reliable, charged reasonable prices, and any complaints about service were rectified instantly. They were honestly better than our regulars that people honestly didn't care enough to report. I know that there were awful things going on to maintain their stranglehold that we never saw, but, from our perspective, the mafia-run trash collection was great. Just FTR, the Knapp Commission, chronicled in the film Serpico, wiped out most such corruption in NY almost overnight. Cops would no longer accept as much as a cup of coffee from us without making a show of putting down money to pay for it. Hey. The text was from an unknown number. It was a harmless enough message, so I simply blocked the number and went on with my day, quickly forgetting about it. Hey. This time it was an email. The sender's address was a long string of random letters and numbers. I paused, remembering the text I received the week prior and wondering how this email got through the filters. I reported it, blocked the email address, and once again pushed it from my mind. Hey. A few days later I got another message. I stared at the Facebook notification. The profile was essentially blank, the name once again just random letters and numbers. I felt sweat start to prickle on my brow. The messages before were easily written off as spam, just the result of some seedy website selling my information. This message, however, felt more personal. I reported the account and blocked it for good measure, but had a much harder time forgetting about it. Hey. Only a day later, an Instagram message from a blank account. Now I truly felt targeted. I reported and blocked the account and spent the next few hours trying to figure out who could be sending the messages and why they were sending them to me. Hey. A few hours later I received the next message through Reddit. With Facebook and Instagram both linked to my name, I could see someone tracking me across both platforms, but this was something else. I had no idea how they could have found my profile, let alone identified it as me. Hey. Discord, and I was now sure I was being stalked. But what could I do? Report it to the police? No crime had actually been committed, just a series of innocuous, albeit creepy, messages. Hey. I started seeing it everywhere, in my real life, all throughout my day. I could no longer just report and block out the dreaded messages. Hey. I saw a billboard on my way to work boldly declaring that one word. Hey. Next was a flyer on a telephone pole with those three letters. Hey. A note slipped in my mailbox. They know where I live. Hey. Sidewalk chalk along my driveway. Hey. Spray paint on the side of my house. Hey. Scrawled across my bathroom mirror. I knew the next time would be worse. Hey. I woke up in the middle of the night to the feeling of something in my mouth. Rolling over I gagged and tore it out with my fingers. It was a slip of paper, neatly rolled up despite my saliva and grabbing. What do you want? I screamed desperately into the darkness. Hey. The darkness whispered back. What is the brutal truth about life after marriage? As I write this, Christmas is just 1 week away. If you're not familiar with Christmas, among other things, it's usually the biggest gift-giving day of the year, at least for us Americans. Also the celebration of the birth of our Savior and all that jazz. Anyway, this is how gift-giving works between my wife and me, a veteran married couple. This is also how it works between most veteran married couples I know. We just tell each other what, exactly, complete with pictures and Amazon links if necessary, we want our spouse to get us for Christmas. Sometimes, we even buy it on their credit cards, since we share finances anyway. Sometimes, we even buy it ourselves, wrap it, put it under the tree, and tell our spouse that we took care of it. There have been times when my wife opened her Christmas present for me, and I was just as surprised as my children were when we saw it. I got you a new pair of running shoes. Nice. In the past, I attempted to deviate from my wife's official Christmas list. You know, to surprise her. I was trying to be romantic. It rarely went over well, particularly if I attempted to get her clothes or perfume. Just stick to the list, married guys. Perhaps it's not as romantic, but it's still the best option. If you want to deviate from the list, make sure you get everything on the list, too. This year, my wife requested something that I had to purchase in a showroom and have delivered at a later date to the house. I FaceTimed with my wife while I was in the store, to make sure I was getting the exact one that she wanted. It's being delivered on a day when she works from home. She'll have to be there to receive it. And they say romance is dead. What's the saddest card decline moment you've seen? It was 1998. My son was 6 months old. I had just recently left my husband, had just gotten out of rehab and was doing my best just to get through the day. I was pretty much broke at the time but knew I had about $20 in my bank account and I needed baby food and something to eat for myself. It was late at night, my son was crying because he was hungry. I was exhausted mentally and physically and I'm pretty sure I looked it. I had $18 worth of items in my cart but then my card was declined. My face turned bright red with embarrassment as I asked the cashier to take my frozen dinner off the total but my card still didn't work. Because it was late at night, there was only one checkout lane open and there were 2 people behind me in line at this point. After the cashier had taken everything off but the baby food, about 50 cents, I tried to dig some change out of the bottom of my purse but I was so frustrated and embarrassed at that point that all my change fell on the floor. By this time my son was screaming, I was crying, and this horrible lady behind me commented that some people just shouldn't be allowed to have children and could I hurry up and leave the store. I was about to leave all of my groceries and run out of the store as fast as I could when I hear this voice from another woman in line, I've got your groceries, go take care of your baby. So now I'm crying even harder. I asked the woman for her information so that I could pay her back at some point and that's when I noticed that she only had one arm and that her business card said she worked for one of our animal rescue centers in Houston. She told me to just make a donation when I could. I never forgot that, and it's been over 2 decades and what this woman did changed me. I now work in nonprofit and get to watch people's lives change before my eyes on a daily basis. You never know how one person's actions can make a huge difference in someone's life. I don't know how my wife got pregnant. When my urologist told me I was infertile, I didn't know how I was going to break it to my wife. We'd been trying with no luck for some time. We both wanted kids so bad. I was an only child, so I always wanted a handful. I'd never gone to church, but at that moment I actually said a prayer pleading that my doctor was wrong. At home, I stood at my front door and took some deep breaths. I opened the door and there were balloons everywhere. Did I forget our anniversary? In the kitchen my wife was smiling ear to ear. She was standing under a banner that said, "We're pregnant." Can you believe it? Are you sure? Yes. I've taken 5 tests. I'm sure. You're pregnant? We finally did it. She hugged me tightly and put my hand on her stomach. There was only one answer. If she was really pregnant, then she had to be cheating on me. I could have accused her right there, told her what my urologist said. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to find the son of a bitch who did this. Maybe even kill him. Months went by. Doctor's appointments. Ultrasounds. I watched her like a hawk. There were 0 signs of infidelity. Was it a one-night stand? I wondered if I should just live and forget. After all, I loved my wife dearly. Maybe we could just raise this kid like we always wanted. When she was nearly 9 months pregnant, I saw a text message on her phone. There was no contact info. I need to see you. The baby will be here soon. It's time. It had to be the cheater. I took everything in me not to get violent. Instead, I called in sick to work, waiting outside our house to follow my wife. Sure enough, before long she got in her car and left. I followed her to the edge of town where she parked outside a rundown house. She walked in the front door like she owned the place. I should have just waited outside to get a look at the guy. But I was furious. After psyching myself up, I burst through the front door. Inside my wife was naked on a large wooden table breathing heavily, pushing. The only light was from candles. There were 10 other people here all dressed in strange red robes with hoods. Finally, one of the robed men said, "The husband has arrived." What the fuck? 4 of the robed people grabbed me by the arms and pulled me near my wife. Satan's soul cannot enter the child without a human sacrifice. You are an unbaptized only son. Your blood will bring the Antichrist. They pulled out knives and stabbed me over and over, rubbing the blood on my wife. I lay motionless on the floor, moments from death, when I heard the cries of a newborn baby. What did you not know due to growing up in a very small town? You're not supposed to say the N-word. This was news to me. Now, I understood that it was a very bad, very racist word. I understood that under no circumstances should I ever use it at someone. But I didn't know that people would be offended if you just said it in general. I was sitting with a group of friends at college when one called another some mean name. "That's the worst thing you could have called me," he laughed. "I'm pretty sure N-word is worse," I said. Everyone went so fucking quiet. "You can't say that," one girl said. "I wasn't calling anyone that," I clarified. "I was just saying, that'd be a worse thing to call someone." "Yeah, no." That explanation did not fly. The rest of the evening was just a smidge awkward for me. In Wyoming I'd heard people say the N-word in groups that were, of course, entirely white. Sometimes it was used on its own. Other times it was combined with words like prairie or sand to marginalize an entirely different group of people. Either way, people said it and it wasn't the biggest deal. I always felt uncomfortable when I heard it, but I figured it didn't matter much because they weren't talking about people who were actually there. Right? Naturally I experienced no counterarguments to this point because it was Wyoming and, as I said, basically everyone I interacted with was white. There was no one to tell me that they actually didn't like hearing me say that word in any context. Thank you very much. So, I learned quickly. I haven't done that since. But damn, the lack of diversity in some small towns just really puts you behind. What did a teacher say to you that you still think about to this day? Don't believe anything they say. They'll lie to you until they don't need you anymore. One of my coworkers said this once when some district level people came to our school to discuss merging our school with several others. He'd gone through the process before at another school. I didn't believe him. I thought he was just being bitter. He did complain a lot about a lot of things. I decided to be as involved in the merger process as possible. For over a year, I went to meetings, joined committees, tried to sell parents on the idea of the merger, offered suggestions for logistical issues the new school would face, etc. All of the teachers were told we would be first in line for positions at the new school. We even went to professional development for the curriculum the new school was going to implement. Then, on the Friday right before spring break, just 6 weeks from when the school closed for good, as we left the building, all of the teachers were given letters. Of 15 teachers at the school, only 2 were asked to work at the new school. The rest of our letters said, basically, thanks for your help in the process. Good luck in your continued job hunt. It was a kick in the gut. It was also exactly what my coworker warned would happen. It was only when I pondered what had happened that I realized they really had been stringing me and everyone else along the whole time. They kept asking for our input, then doing what they were going to do anyway. I even spent one Saturday morning in a 3-hour meeting to discuss a name for the new school. We came up with 4 possibilities. The next week, they picked a name, one that wasn't on our list, the name they'd wanted the whole time. They just wanted it to seem like we were involved, so we wouldn't start our job hunt too soon and leave them struggling to fill positions mid-year. What kind of parent forgets to pick up their kid from school? I know this one. I got a call from the school one day, 15 minutes after pickup was due. They were angry at me. Very angry. I had not picked my child up. They had also assumed that, because I was a woman, I was the one who would do the mothering things, like picking the kid up from school. Because I was just going to yoga and the dog groomer while my husband pulled in the big bucks? Private schools, man. Those people are weird. As it turned out, her father was the one whose job allowed him to leave over his lunch break and do pick up on this half day at school. But he'd forgotten. Maybe got sucked into a game in the break room, or was having a conversation with a coworker, or had a sudden overwhelming lust for a fast food meal that he'd stop wanting as soon as he opened the bag. See, my kid's father has an executive function disorder. That's a term for a specific set of malfunctions in the prefrontal cortex, which governs behavior and allows us to rank and recall priorities. Everybody starts life with a crappy prefrontal cortex. In people with executive function disorders, the development of that part of the brain lags behind typically developing children and never entirely catches up, even in adulthood. When he was a child in school, my husband was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. His parents ignored the diagnosis and punished him for his poor grades by canceling all of his extracurriculars and making him drop out of sports. He went on to barely manage his adulthood, until the point where he couldn't. Eventually, he went to a psychiatrist and got re-diagnosed. First he tried stimulant medications, and that helped him remember things, but he was angry all the time. Now he takes antidepressants, and he is calmer. Still forgetful and downright strange at, for instance, the ways he performs household chores. He rarely puts things away in the same place twice, and if an item has two parts, he never puts them in the same drawer, but he's no longer cripplingly afraid of trying tasks. One of the effects of his executive function disorder is his inability to keep track of time. ADHD is sometimes described as a temporal disability. Likewise, he does not have a sense of space or distance. He struggles to follow step-by-step driving directions and refuses to look at a map because they make me panic. He never got the difference between left and right figured out. He cannot estimate with any degree of accuracy the amount of time it will take to commute from one location to another, even if it's his regular, daily commute. He does not understand how locations relate to one another. I once fell asleep as we approached our apartment from the south at the end of a road trip, and woke up 20 minutes west of our apartment, because he saw a sign for the road he grew up on and that felt familiar and safe, so he detoured to the other end of the county. Oftentimes, as we are leaving our neighborhood, I have to remind him that the direction we are going requires him to aim the car in the opposite direction of what he has just done. Sometimes he remembers to buy me a present for Christmas or my birthday. Other times he doesn't, and when he sees the other presents come out, he goes into a panic and starts yelling for me to come help him figure it out. He appeals to me to reassure him that it's fine. I don't do this. It's not fine. I understand that he's not forgetting things on purpose, but that doesn't mean the things are unforgotten. My husband is lost in time and space. These are strange dimensions that he does not have the ability to navigate. Most of us navigate with an internal clock, an internal compass, an internal map of all the places that our little worlds touch. To him, the rest of us are like flocks of birds or schools of fish. Somehow, we all know how and when and where to move. With a great deal of repetition, he can adapt himself to form new habits. He can learn a new commute. He can adjust himself to a new daily schedule. But if his routine is disrupted by any kind of distraction at all, such as a manager coming by his desk to talk to him right at close of business or an interesting article popping up on his phone, he loses his tenuous grip on his awareness of what he's supposed to do next. This is where the fast food impulse comes in. For people with an executive function disorder, a new idea becomes an imperative that drowns out all other priorities. Even I want French fries drowning out my daughter is waiting for me at school. These are the parents who forget to pick up their kids from school, the parents who leave the baby in the hot car, the spouses who forget the birthday, the guests who always arrive late. Not all of them have ADHD or another diagnosed executive function disorder. Some of them have a condition and never get diagnosed. Some of them don't have enough of the diagnostic criteria to neatly fall into a category of disability, but still have enough for it to interfere with their lives. Some of them have substance abuse issues that create similar disruptions in those automatic patterns and senses and knowledge resources in the brain. And poverty, war, chronic pain, and other major stressors can cause anybody's brain to begin to glitch out in these ways. The people who forget to pick their kids up from school are caught between the incomprehensible chaos that is society and the world, and their own rigid coping habits. They don't love their kids any less than the other parents. They don't misunderstand the consequences of leaving their child alone at school with employees who are already supposed to be somewhere else. But their lack of malice doesn't make it okay. At the time I met my husband, he was happily and intently focused on his college studies. He told me, dismissively, that every energetic boy in the 90s got diagnosed with that. He had believed what his parents and teachers told him, that he was a smart kid who just wasn't trying hard enough. And suddenly, in college, it was a lot easier to try. He could skip class to play video games and nobody would call his parents about it. He could write a long, rambling paper that showed he'd studied and understood the material, and the teacher would forgive his missed assignments. His mom still drove him to the dentist, and an inheritance from his grandfather covered tuition. Everything felt fine. And so everything was fine. Until it wasn't, until he had to follow an employer's work schedule, pay bills regularly, keep a house clean, be attentive to new members of his family. Until he was supposed to pick up his kid from school. And everything collapsed. There are many people who think that ADHD isn't a real disorder, or that you should never medicate for it. The truth is, there are close to 8 billion people on this planet, and a hefty percentage of them are not operating at or above the average. Of course they aren't. That's what an average is. A large part of the population will fall below it. Some of those people fall below it because their brain function makes it very, very hard for them to behave the way that society needs everyone to behave. Have you ever met someone for the first time and got the strongest feeling that the person was bad? When I was an adolescent, my dad's cousin came to town. Both my mom and dad had gobs of cousins. Mom's parents had 11 siblings each, dad's mom had 3, and his dad had 8, and it wasn't unusual to meet one I had never even heard of before. This particular cousin had been very close with my dad when they were kids, but his father had accepted a job on the West Coast, over 2,000 miles away from us, and it had been decades since they had been in touch. My mother invited him to have dinner at our home with our family of 6. Throughout the meal he told stories of the pranks they pulled growing up, his military service, and his own family of 6. The visit went well. He thanked my mother for the meal and hugged my dad goodbye. As they were getting ready for bed that night, my mom mentioned to my dad that she had been creeped out the entire night, and wanted him to promise her that he would never let that man be left alone with any of us kids. Dad was indignant and demanded to know what exactly he did to deserve that type of treatment. Mom had no idea, but her instinct was strong enough that she continued pushing the point until Dad relented. I did not know the rest of this story until I was an adult with a child of my own. The year I went off to college, my family found out that Dad's cousin had been arrested for murder, and it was discovered that he was responsible for at least 17 deaths over a span of 23 years. He is currently on death row. Despite his healthy childhood, military service, and appearances of being a family man, my mother's instincts were spot on. What was the most heart-shattering sentence you've heard in a wedding speech? You're the one who got away. I think I have seriously damaged my marriage before it even began. I met my husband through his brother Chris, who I had a crush on in college. I never was clingy or never acted on my feelings, and I never really allowed myself to get too close to him because I knew that my feelings weren't reciprocated. Chris knew, however, I had a crush on him, or at least he felt it. He would always say that I was girlfriend material and that he wouldn't want to lead me on. He wanted to have fun before that. He would say this to others, but even once to me. On 2 occasions, he would text me that he had feelings for me, only to apologize later and retract his words. But on Christmas 4 years ago, he texted me that he was in love with me and wanted to take me out on a date. He said he was done playing around and wanted a relationship. He was invited to New Year's Eve party that my then roommate and I had. He told me he wanted to talk to me then. When he came to the party, he had his brother with him. Chris spent the party going out of his way to ignore me, and later I saw him making out with my roommate, and they spent the night in her room. I decided there and then that I will drop it. Enough is enough. The next morning he told me that he messed up big time, and he apologized. During the party, I got to know his brother, who was the opposite of Chris. He was shy and hated attention, and he was just the best, and soon after, he asked me on a date. We are married now. Our wedding was last Wednesday. I want to make 2 things clear. I never went beyond a crush on Chris, and only after I fell for my husband that I understand what love is. He is everything to me, and I love him more than anything. I never told anyone about my crush, and when I met my husband, I didn't tell him either. Chris wasn't happy I was seeing his brother, and he's been cold towards me since. Even when it got serious between my husband and me, Chris held a speech at our rehearsal dinner, and he basically outed everything and ended with how he regretted not asking me out sooner and how he will always regret it. It was very awkward afterward, and nobody talked, and on our wedding day, my husband did everything to act normal, and he made sure everything was as planned, but I could feel that he was hurt and angry. After the party, he asked me if I loved Chris and if I dated him for that reason. I started crying because it was not true. We started dating and became friends, and I made sure it was him I wanted before committing. And I never loved anyone like I love my husband. I told him all this and more, and I apologized so much for not telling him everything. In the beginning, I thought it was my own private matter, and I didn't feel the need to discuss it with a then stranger to me. When our relationship evolved, I just never thought Chris was relevant, and my crush seemed a silly thing. Now it's back to bite me in the ass. My husband is very sad, and he barely talks to me. We're leaving for our honeymoon in 2 weeks. He barely speaks about it. The thing we both waited for with so much anticipation and longing. I can't turn back time, so I don't know what to do. What happened when the girl best friend became more than the best friend? I feel horrible, and I love her, but I can't help how I feel about you. My boyfriend and his best friend fell in love. I've never experienced this kind of betrayal before. Delaney has been my best friend since high school, and my boyfriend Adam and I have been together for 2 years. All 3 of us would hang out together, and I saw the relationship between Delaney and Adam as a friendly banter, that of a brother and a sister. Delaney never spoke down on Adam, nor Adam of Delaney. Of course, they'd have disagreements, but I always saw it as something funny, like children fighting. I noticed the signs when Delaney said she didn't want Adam to hang out with us. She said she just wanted it to be her and I every time Adam got mentioned or anything. She'd look super upset. I asked her what was wrong, and she insisted it was nothing. The next day, I'm staying the night at Adam's, and he's asking about Delaney. He said she was acting weird. I asked if he had talked to her, and he said not much but that she seemed off, and he asked me to check on her. Adam went to take a shower, and he got a message from Delaney. He's always left his phone around me, and I really didn't think anything of it. So I checked it because I had messaged Delaney, but she never responded. The first message she sent was, "I feel horrible, and I love her, but I can't help how I feel about you. You need to choose because you can't have both." Adam and Delaney had hooked up a few months ago after Valentine's Day and almost all the time since. I remember when Adam brought Delaney and me flowers on Valentine's Day, but I only thought of it as a friendly gesture. Delaney was so happy, and it was all she talked about. She kept telling me how lucky I was, but as my best friend, I didn't think it would mean she'd do this. I read more messages, times when Delaney and Adam said they were hanging out with friends or doing overtime at work. They were with each other. They had sent each other nude photos, and Adam had even compared me and Delaney's bodies. She had been trying to convince Adam to tell me about them and leave me, hoping I would understand that they were in love, but apparently, Adam was still in love with me and didn't want to let me go. Delaney was always there for me, supportive and kind, the most beautiful person I'd ever known. And Adam, the love of my life, who would have given his last dollar if it meant I'd be okay, was an old soul, someone you could always depend on. So I don't understand why they do this to me. I used my phone to take pictures of everything, and when Adam came back out, I told him my mom had an emergency, and I had to leave. I needed some time to process what I was feeling and think about my next steps. I spent the whole night crying and reading over all the messages I'd collected. After losing myself and crying myself to sleep, I woke up the next morning and took a long shower. I pondered for a bit but ultimately decided that no friend or boyfriend should treat me this way, and I needed to do something about it. I haven't confronted Delaney or Adam, though they've both texted me asking if I'm alright. I'll probably sit them both down together and handle this like adults. I'm almost 30, and I thought maybe we'd get married one day, and Delaney would be my maid of honor. What's the funniest car accident you've been in? He ended up hitting a police car. I'm a college student and cycle to campus every day. It's not a long ride, but I have to go through a zone where it's illegal to ride a bicycle on the sidewalk, so I'm forced to ride on the road. Most drivers don't care and just go around me since I stay on the edge and don't make myself a nuisance. Also, I have a shitty bike that I commute on. This will be important later. A few weeks ago, a guy in a Ford SUV started yelling at me as he drove by while I was in the road-only zone. All the usual get off the road, roads are for cars, you're too slow kinda stuff. I get that from Drivers Weekly. I just ignore it and keep going. This man was remarkable, though, since he cut right in front of me and slammed on his brakes after yelling. I was able to stop before I hit him, and he floored it out of there, yelling, "Better be careful next time, bike." I was pretty mad, but I hadn't got his license plate or anything, and I doubt anything could be done about it anyway. There was no real proof. Over lunch, I told one of my friends who works as an EMT the story, and he got seriously pissed off. He has seen the results of a car successfully brake checking on a cyclist, and they aren't pretty. 2 days later, the same Ford SUV/jerk tried to brake check me again. I was expecting it when I heard him yelling, "Get on the sidewalk, bike," from behind, so I avoided a crash again. I told my EMT friend over lunch again, and he was even madder than before. I wanted to let it go since I couldn't do anything about him, and my bicycle wouldn't win in a crash. This guy keeps trying to brake check me every few days during my morning commute whenever we're on the same patch of road at the same time. About a week ago, my EMT friend told me that he told my story to one of his friends in the campus police, who was equally pissed off. The two of them wanted to catch this jerk driver. The plan was to have the policeman parked on the side of the road in hopes of catching and pulling over the jerk. I heartily agreed, and the officer pulled some strings and had himself posted on speeder catching duty for that stretch of road. A few days passed uneventfully, with no sign of the road rager. I saw the cop parked in the same spot on the side of the road every day, where the road had a left turn lane and a straight lane. Finally, I pedal along, and I hear the familiar voice scream, "Get the hell off the road." I yelled back, "Catch me then," and took off. I was spinning my scrawny little chicken legs as hard as they would go and pegged the throttle. This made the driver even madder because I heard his engine roar as he pursued me. He shifted into the left lane as I stayed on the right. I looked to the side and saw a nasty old man in the driver's seat with the passenger window open. His mouth was going like he was yelling, but I couldn't hear him over the wind noise. I saw the police car spot approaching and started to slow down. Taking the opportunity, the driver swung right in front of me. I don't know if it was the speed or his anger that made him swing wide, but he cut across my lane and crashed straight into the back of the police car. I barely applied my brakes, slowed down to about 15 miles per hour, and crashed into the side of his car. The officer got out spitting mad, and called an ambulance and another police car. Everyone was unhurt since the jerk was going only like 25 miles per hour, but there was enough of an impact to trigger the SUV's airbags. The jerk got arrested for driving drunk at 9 a.m., for an illegal lane change, and probably other stuff. I don't know all the details. I imagine that causing a crash like that would entail some additional charges. The guy had to pay for extensive repairs on the police cruiser and for a new e-bike to replace the one he destroyed by cutting in front of me. The frame snapped. On top of that, I hear that his car was defined as totaled by his insurance company since the airbags went off, so he also has to pay for a new car. With any luck, he'll lose his license from the drunk driving charges and won't be able to menace cyclists again. Brides, why did you end things with your partner at the altar? My wedding was a surprise. Last week, I was invited to a supposedly fancy party by my longtime boyfriend, Mark. We had been dating for 5 years, and while we had discussed marriage before, there were no immediate plans for a wedding. Excited about the event, I dressed in my best attire and arrived at the designated venue. As I entered the grand hall, I was completely taken aback to see our family, friends, and acquaintances gathered, eagerly waiting. It turns out Mark had orchestrated an elaborate surprise wedding for us without my knowledge. Everyone erupted into applause as I stood there, shocked and overwhelmed. I just felt a mix of emotions. While I love Mark and had dreamed of our future together, the idea of getting married without any prior discussion or consent felt like a breach of trust. So, I pulled Mark aside and tried to express my concerns and reservations about the surprise wedding. I explained that I wanted a say in the planning process, to be part of the decision making, and to have the chance to prepare mentally and emotionally for such a significant milestone in our lives. However, Mark dismissed my concerns, saying that he thought it would be a romantic gesture and that I would be thrilled. At that moment, I faced a difficult choice: go along with the surprise wedding, put on a smile despite feeling unsettled, or stand up for my autonomy and voice my true feelings. I ultimately decided not to proceed with the surprise wedding, much to the disappointment and confusion of our guests. Now, I am at odds with Mark, our families, and even some of our friends who believe I overreacted and spoiled a beautiful moment. However, I firmly believe a marriage should be a joint decision, with open communication and shared expectations. Everyone's excuse for this is I have always talked about marrying Mark. And again, the problem isn't marrying him, and the problem is not having any say in my wedding. Mark thought I'd appreciate it because I always spoke about how stressful planning a wedding must be. Yes, it's stressful, but I'd still like to plan one. After this ordeal, everyone asked if Mark and I were ending things, to which I replied no. I emphasized to them and Mark that I still wanted to marry him, and most feel like this is making me more of a bridezilla since I just wasted a perfectly fine wedding. TikTok: am I wrong for refusing to attend my own surprise wedding, even though it was intended as a romantic gesture? My boyfriend was not the hero when we were mugged. My boyfriend is a big hero fanatic and does everything in his power to be like one. It's endearing and one of the many things I love about him because he wants to be the good he wishes to see in the world. But this mindset he has is why we are fighting right now. We've been quarantining at my apartment, and he suggested we go on a night walk since we've been getting stir crazy from being inside all day. He figured it'd be better for social distancing to go out at night. I was hesitant because we live in a bad neighborhood, but he assured me he'd protect me. On our walk, we were cornered by a man with a knife that demanded our wallets. I remembered John Mulaney's Street Smarts bit from the Netflix show and was going to throw my wallet past the mugger so we could run away, but my boyfriend started arguing with him and was spouting off a bunch of stuff about justice and how the mugger wouldn't get away with this. It looked like he was getting ready to fight. I was taken aback by this, and I guess the mugger was too because it gave me enough time to take the important stuff out of my wallet while he was distracted. I interrupted my boyfriend's monologue and said, "Take it, just don't hurt us," and threw it behind the guy. When he turned, I grabbed my boyfriend's hand, and we booked it back to the apartment. We got home safely, and I was relieved we were okay, but my boyfriend was fuming. He was pissed that I interrupted him from protecting me when he could have, in his words, clearly handled it himself. I told him he could have gotten himself killed. He said he was obviously stronger than the mugger and would have won. I explained that the guy had a weapon and my boyfriend didn't, so the odds were stacked against him. Not only that, but I didn't want my boyfriend to get killed over a damn wallet. We argued for longer than necessary, so I shut it down and told him we could talk about it when our adrenaline wasn't so high, but I needed to file a police report while the event was fresh. He stomped off to our room while I called the cops. When I was off the phone, I went to lie down with him, but he rolled away from me. The next day, he was still angry and had already told his friends and family about what had happened to us. I thought that they would be understanding about how I handled it, but they were mad at me for not letting him have his opportunity to be a hero. His mom even ridiculed me for emasculating him. I want to reopen the conversation so we can understand and move past it, but if he isn't receptive, I will ask him to move back in with his mom. I want to understand where I went wrong if I went wrong, but honestly, I feel like he's being childish and unreasonable. Did I do the wrong thing? What's the fastest you've wiped a smirk off of someone's face? I had a best friend in my high school who was Hispanic. He arrived as a refugee from Bolivia as his father was opposed to the military government and they told him to leave or be shot. He kind of looked like John Belushi and he had an offbeat sense of humor. He was also brilliant. A lot of people did not like him as it was a white school and he had a ruddy complexion and a thick Spanish accent. This was the 1970s. He also had a hard time as his family was starting with nothing but lived well back home. He had left all his friends behind. He used to get a little teary. The poor fellow got picked on quite a bit. Eventually myself and my friends taught his student tormentors about respect in sessions behind the portables. But some of the teachers were relentless in their dislike of this great guy. When he graduated, an English teacher who was especially mean told him that he had won the award most likely to fail. Fast forward 20 years in our high school reunion. He still looked like Belushi and still had the sense of humor, but had started a manufacturing business, lived in the wealthiest neighborhood in the city and drove a new Mercedes. He was reluctant to come as he still feared being put down by the teachers in front of his family. I told him that I would fix that, but I needed his car. I arrived 2 hours early and parked right by the front entrance and stood leaning against it. Soon that jerk teacher arrived with some of his old cronies. "Wow," he said, "someone has done well. Whatever happened to that loser friend of yours?" And he laughed. I answered him, "This is Renzo's car. His other car is a Land Rover. These cars are parked in the 3-car garage beside his house in Rosedale beside the BMW. He has a wonderful wife and 4 beautiful children." "What was that you told him on graduation day?" He looked pretty stunned. I then advised him to stay clear of my friend unless it was to apologize. Alien abductees or those who claim to have seen a UFO/alien phenomena. What is your story? Let me preface this by stating that almost all of the encounters that I have witnessed have been with at least one other individual. The first 2 encounters happened on 2 consecutive days in 1997, and the numerous other encounters happened over the span of 90 days a year and a half ago. I do not recall being abducted. I have filed reports with the incredibly incompetent MUFON. Back in 97 my buddy and I had just finished up our shift at a pizza joint. It was after 11 p.m. We were wore out and wanted to get stoned. We were completely sober. Anyway, we drove out into a cornfield in the off year, so it was full of rye. We were about a half mile off the road. It was pitch black, and because of our vantage point, I could see headlights in any direction for a good mile. We were way out in the country, so no worries. My buddy starts breaking up the weed when I notice what I believe to be truck headlights shine directly from behind, take a hard left, and disappear. My buddy didn't seem to notice, but I became frantic. I thought it was the cops. My friend thinks I am messing with him and continues breaking up some really terrible brick weed. I recall looking at the stars, and one star in particular grabbed my attention. I can't tell you why, but it looked like your average star. Within 30 seconds this star starts moving up and down, side to side, and in circles. I yelled in a panic, "What the flock is that?" My buddy gives a dismissive sigh, and then he looks where I am pointing. For 5 minutes the UFO continues to move in very fluid movements, making impossible maneuvers, and do so in complete silence. Without notice, this one object becomes 5 equally impressive star-like objects. They stayed close together. At times they moved in some kind of formation, and other times they seemed to move independently. Just as quick as the 5 came, they fused back together as one. We were in shock, but we didn't feel like we were in harm's way. We were recapping what we witnessed, but that single UFO was still there. It wasn't moving too much. We thought things were coming to a close, but we were wrong. This time the one object turned into at least 7 objects. The way they moved and jerked around felt aggressive to me. My friend must have felt the same way, because he said he was starting to get nervous. I told him we should go. I embarrassingly confessed that I knew it was there for us, and I became fearful. We haul us out of there, and this thing follows us to the outskirt of town. What are some things that look harmless during the day, but get insanely creepy during the night? Good people sometimes pick up hitchhikers in the middle of the night. You see, one time a few years ago I had gone to a concert with my girlfriend and sometime in the middle of the show she disappeared. Eventually she came back with some guy who I had never met but she was obviously very close with. The show ends and my girl asks me if it would be alright if we gave her friend a ride home. Sure, I said that shouldn't be a problem despite the fact she had ditched me for this random guy at the show. Well, we get to the guy's house and she asks if it would be cool if we had a few drinks together. I told her I wanted to go but she convinced me to stay. Eventually the two of them go inside to get something and don't come back out. After 15 or 20 minutes I go inside looking for them and can't find them anywhere. I look for a while before deciding flock it, she is obviously cheating on me with this guy, and so I leave. My phone was dead. It was around 2:30 in the morning. I had no idea where I was, and so naturally I started walking. After about an hour of walking I finally recognized a landmark and realized I had been walking in the opposite direction from my house. Disappointed, sad, quite drunk, newly single, and alone I turn around and start walking the other way. My feet started to hurt after a number of miles. I was starting to cry a bit, and so I decide I would hitchhike when I saw the occasional car. A number of cars pass without stopping, but soon enough a car pulls over for me. Thank God, but who the flock is willing to pick up a hitchhiker at this time, I wondered? It turns out it was 2 high school kids pulling an all-nighter after a party and who thought I looked like I needed help. I told them about how shitty my night was and they told me they would cheer me up. We ended up driving around until 5 or 6 a.m. smoking weed and freestyle rapping to beats that one of them made. They taught me all about how to let rhymes fly and told me I was a natural. We were telling jokes and stories and laughing and having a hella good time. They gave me a ride to my house when the sun started to come up, and in return I gave them a decent bit of weed. I forgot all about the girl until the next day when I woke up and turned my phone back on, but I will never forget those 2 guys who helped me get home safely. Night Watchman of Reddit, what is the creepiest situation you've been in on shift? I used to work for a relatively small security company. It was privately owned, had about 30 employees altogether. They'd get a contract with a factory and then basically your job was to sit in that factory for 8 to 12 hours when no one was working in it. So I'd be working by myself, alone, overnight, in a completely empty factory. In my 2 years of doing that job, I never one time saw a single thing I would call supernatural. However, I did see Dennis. One night my captain calls me on my phone and tells me a new trainee will be coming in about 5 a.m. and to show him the ropes, teach him how to make rounds, you walk around the building, that's basically what making a round is, etc. So it's about 4:45 a.m. and I step outside to the parking lot to have a smoke and wait on the new guy. After about 10 minutes a car pulls up, stops, backs up, and drives away. I was clearly visible, so I have no idea why he left, but the car passed by about 3 to 4 more times before finally pulling in and shutting off the engine. I can see him in the car and he's just sitting in the driver's seat staring at me. In the back seat are 2 kids probably around 6 to 8. After about 3 minutes of me wondering what the flock is going on, he gets out of the car. Dennis is flocked up looking. He's about 4 feet 10 inches and fatter than damn near anyone I have ever seen. He has a huge rash covering about 70% of his body with a white crust outlining most of it. He then speaks. Had a little trouble finding the place. His voice is high-pitched. I mean really high-pitched. I'm talking Judge Doom in the final scene of Who Framed Roger Rabbit high-pitched. Then he extends his hand to shake mine. Without thinking much, I shake it. There's 1 finger on it. 1. And the rest of the hand looks like some kind of stumpy flesh mitten. One of the kids gets out of the car, has the same rash, is also very fat, is also missing fingers. He says, "Daddy, can I get a drink?" Dennis turns around and screams in that high-pitched voice, "Get back in the damn car and don't you get out again." I'm in flocking shock. So I take the guy around the factory, show him the perimeter, tell him where emergency stuff is. About a minute into our walk I notice this guy smells like hell. I mean, he literally reeks of ball sweat and fresh diarrhea. The whole time he's asking me strange questions, like, do you have a crush on anyone that works here? Or can I hunt on this property? He finally leaves after standing in the office trying to make small talk with me for about 15 minutes after the tour. On his way out he said, "We're gonna be good friends, even if you don't think so now." I went home about 2 hours later and stood in the shower for a good solid hour washing myself, trying to get the image of that guy out of my head. Called my captain and asked him to reassign me someplace else. Never had to see him again. That's been more than 10 years and it still bothers me. What are you 100% sure of you saw, but nobody believes you? In 2003, when I was 14 I started bussing tables for a local pizza place to save money for my first car. My grandpa decided he was going to sell his '76 Camaro and I knew I had to have it. I mean, he used to pick me up from daycare in this thing. It had to stay in the family. Anyway, I get enough money to buy the car from my grandpa, and my dad spends the money to ship it down from out of state. Thanks again, Dad. I love this thing more than life itself. It smells the way I remember. It struggles to start without giving it a little gas, but once you get her running, she rolls like a top. When I was around 17 I was driving home from my late shift at the pizza place and the headlights and console lights are more dim than normal. I thought it was odd, so I fidgeted with console light controls and the high beam button on the floor, but nothing worked, so I figured I would talk to my dad about it in the morning. Early the next morning the home phone rings. It is my grandma crying, telling us that grandpa is sick and the doctors don't know if he will make it. We all head out and drive 17 hours straight to be with him. He starts getting a little better while we were there and comes through the worst of it, and doctors think he will have a few weeks. We decided to get back home for a bit and come back in a week or so. The second night back in town I went to pick up my then girlfriend, but when the night started getting dark I flipped on the headlights and everything was back to normal brightness. I can't explain it, but I just felt at ease. I felt assurance that my grandpa was going to be okay. Anyway, weeks go by, then months, then years. 6 wonderful long years go by. Grandpa has been slowly declining lately and we had plans to come back up again. By this time, the Camaro was no longer my daily driver, but I wanted to take my fiancée for a ride in it, so we went to my parents' house to take it out. I noticed the dome light didn't come on. We get a call later that day that my grandma passed away very unexpectedly, so we make the journey back up there immediately, completely heartbroken. When we get there, my grandpa isn't very responsive. He is being kept alive by machines and there isn't much brain activity. Extremely difficult to see your hero in such a state. My dad and I break the news to him that grandma passed away. Instantly his face changes, his eyes swell up and a few tears gently fall down his face. He passed away that night. I found a hidden camera in my room. On June 15th I heard a talking device in my room. It said something somewhat quietly and I couldn't understand it. I jokingly texted my boyfriend that something in my was talking to me, thinking it was just some device I might have left on or something, so then we both just disregarded it and let it be. Everything was fine until Sunday night when I heard something clearly say something like the camera connection is successful. I thought it was strange, so I started looking around and went through literally everything in my room and moved my dresser forward a bit but could not find anything. I then called my boyfriend about it and he told me if I found whatever it was to just throw it away. So I continued my night like normal and played some games, then went to bed. The next morning I wanted to watch some TV on my Roku, but apparently when I moved my dresser looking for the sound I knocked it down, so I had to move my dresser more and look completely behind it. I had a pile of stuffed animals leaning against the dresser, so to avoid them falling over I moved them out of the way, but when I did I found a home camera plugged in behind my dresser and it was on. I quickly unplugged it and called my mom crying. She was at work. She seemed freaked out yet somewhat calm and told me we'd figure it out when she got home. But I had work and was going to my boyfriend's house after. So this camera was in my room for 2 weeks and at this point I was freaked out. Nobody had been to our house in a while and the only people in the house are my 2 brothers, mom, and stepdad, and we have deadlocks on our doors, so there's no possible way of someone breaking in. It has to be one of my very own family members and I don't know how to find out who. My boyfriend and I have the camera, but my parents are telling me to bring it back because they paid for it and that I should just let it go because we won't find out who hid it in my room, and that they are setting it up in our living room because that's where it used to be to see the front door. So my parents are being really chill about this situation and aren't trying anything to find out who it was and only care about the fact that they paid for it and want it back. My boyfriend and I want to take it to the police, but my parents are telling us no and I'm afraid they will kick me out or treat me bad if we do go. I'm staying at my boyfriend's because I'm terrified to go back. Someone in my house has been watching me without clothes and everything, and my guesses are it's my teen brother or stepdad, but no matter who it is I'm pretty sure my mom is covering for them. What is the most selfish act you have ever witnessed? A little background: I was working in a chain drugstore in Southern California, the only employee who came to work, on Christmas Eve. We were a 24-hour store, so, having cleaned everything, and faced all the stock on the shelves, I was thinking how to murder the dancing Santa. Bad recording, 2.5 feet tall, and poorly made. 10:30, 22:30 for 24-hour clocks. A guy comes in, freaking out. His wife has recently left him for her hot stud boyfriend, with whom she has a brand new baby. They are divorced, but she got the kids on holidays. He had bought and wrapped the presents for the kids, daughter, son, and dropped them off at her boyfriend's house, left them on the porch, because she refused to open the door until he left. He gets home, and finds the kids waiting on his front porch. His ex-wife's mother had just dropped them off, and left them alone, because ex-wife, new baby, and hot stud were going to his parents for Christmas, and she didn't want the kids getting in the way. Grandma had plans of her own, and refused to take the kids with her. Ex-wife left him with 2 kids with no change of clothes, no presents, not enough groceries, on Christmas Eve, and there was no way he could not make her sound like the totally selfish bitch she was. Semi-happy ending. I abused the hell out of my authority as the manager, and store used or override discount at everything we needed to put together a Christmas for his kids. Each of them got a ream of paper, the largest box of Crayola, crayons, we had, a generic fuzzy toy, and 2 other toys that he thought they might like. Each present was individually wrapped in a different paper, with big fancy, store-bought, bows, and a Christmas card on each present, plus each one got a good-sized bag of stocking stuffers. Pocket-sized toys and games, candy, fruit, nuts, etc. Then I threw in, from me, a couple of bags of Christmas candy and chocolates. It's Christmas Eve, and your mother has her mother drop you off at your father's house, who isn't even home, because she doesn't want you, because she has the new baby that you aren't even allowed to touch. I really hope she got what she deserved. What's the rudest thing you've witnessed a family do in a restaurant? My boyfriend lived and worked together, my children were old enough to fend for themselves. Youngest was 17, so on Fridays we would go out to dinner together, trying different places to eat. We went to a diner/restaurant a bit far from home and was seated in a section that was not full/busy yet. After we ordered, another family came in with 2 younger, 4 to 6 years/old, kids, who they just let run around. No problem. They were quiet at first. Our salads arrive and we start to eat and these young kids come up to the end of our table and just stand there and watch us. A bit annoying to have kids staring while we eat, so I ask the parents if they can seat their kids. Their reply was no, that they weren't hurting anything, that they were just curious. I asked again for them to control the kids. Mom rolled her eyes and called them to the table. A few minutes later, they are running around again playing some game. Salads are finished, here comes our food. The waiter almost loses it, tripping over a kid on the floor, but made a great save. Then there they are, at the end of our table staring again. The manager comes back to speak to the parents after the waiter told him about the kids running around. The parents seat them, the manager leaves, again they are at the table watching us eat. I figured it was useless to ask the mom to control them, so I yelled at the kids in my sternest voice to get away from this table and if you come back I will beat you. Of course they ran to mom crying and mom starts yelling at me. Now here comes Mr. Manager to find the problem. I told him what happened and the mom didn't want to control the kids, so I did. He asks mom and the whole party to please leave and we got desserts on the house. He said there was always a problem with that family, but no one did anything about it like I did. I really hate going out to eat with other adults and having kids interrupt us. What was your most gratifying experience serving on a jury? I was on a jury for a car accident case. The young lady had already admitted guilt, so responsibility was not in question, only how much the guy she hit was due for his supposed injuries. The guy was asking for a lot of money. As we listened to his testimony about how he was in severe pain, especially with debilitating migraines, we were told he couldn't hold down a job because of the frequent headaches that put him out of commission. His wife and grown son testified to missed vacations, ruined holidays, a complete downward spiral in quality of life for all 3 of them, and inability to cover bills, etc., all supposedly from the accident. Then we learned that the only treatment the guy sought for his injuries was weekly or twice weekly chiropractic appointments. For over a year, he didn't go to a regular doctor, and only got an MRI after filing his case. Again after a year, we learned that he had been in business with the chiropractor in the past, and that someone connected with their business had done time for selling steroids. And that his wife had been convicted of lying to authorities about all of it. We also learned that this wasn't his first lawsuit of this nature, and that his lawyer had represented him in that other lawsuit, too. So, it is starting to sound like the whole group of them are shady, making a living suing people, and are proven criminals and liars. Especially when the guy didn't seek medical treatment for such a long time. Upon deliberation, we asked ourselves what is reasonable? Asking the young lady who admitted her fault in the accident to pay for 96 chiropractic visits, an MRI, and enough other money to compensate for not working did not seem reasonable to us. In his position, any reasonable person would have sought medical treatment in a timely fashion. Anyone would have had an MRI done. None of us bought his story. We did rule in his favor, though. We awarded him the exact amount stated for the MRI. What are some embarrassing puberty stories? I started my period when I was 13 and my mom was out of town. I vaguely knew what was happening from my mom buying tampons for herself when I went to the grocery store with her on occasion, but we had never talked about it. My stepdad was the one taking care of us and he was at work. I ended up stuffing my panties full of toilet paper and my pockets with what allowance I had and walking the 18 blocks to the convenience store. I was terrified of tampons because there was really only one way they could be used and I just knew there was no way I could be able to put something like that inside me. In my mind I had settled on just pushing it out of the tube and laying it in my underwear, hoping that it would catch everything. I got to the store and found their feminine hygiene aisle and realized that tampons weren't the only thing available for what was going on. I was so relieved that I couldn't stop smiling because I found pads. Pads, /o/ I grabbed a box at random and made my way to the cashier. She was an older woman and was probably watching me the entire time staring at the pads on the shelf. She looked at the insanely huge pads I had randomly grabbed and asked me if my mom was at work. I told her she was out of town. This woman took pity on this poor little clueless 13-year-old and talked with me a bit. She went back to the aisle with me and replaced what I had picked up with something more appropriate, smaller pads, and explained to me the differences. She also told me how to use them and had me go into the bathroom there to do it. My walk home was way more comfortable. They were either what's the fastest you've wiped a smirk off of someone's face? I was in a bar with some friends. We all had just finished with basic training and this was our first leave before we were to leave for our assignments postings. Now considering the location, I would have thought that I would not have run into people such as this person who decided to run his mouth about how people from other countries were behind all of the problems here in America. I, of course, being young and stupid, had said you should know considering that you are an immigrant yourself. To give a little clarity, he was a Caucasian man, but this was about all I could gather. Now he immediately jumped into my face and said, "What do you know about this? You're just another brown skin in my country." I am editing the language for everyone's benefit, so I repeated my earlier statement about him being a part of the immigrant problem. Needless to say that he was about to do something until the bartender said that if he started another fight that he would be breaking his probation, not to mention that the bartender was listening to the entire conversation and, like the man's friends, I assumed, were very interested in what I was saying. The guy just smirked and said, "Boy, my family has been living here for almost 200 years. What do you have to say about that?" I said that's not bad for a gypsy, especially considering that my family has been living in this country before it even had a name, not to mention even before any Europeans even knew of its existence. BTW, I happen to be Native American, Apache descendant to be specific. Right after I said that, I turned to the bartender and asked for a drink. When I went to pay for my soda, the bartender said that it was on the house because of all of the people who have visited his bar, no one has ever been able to wipe that smirk off of his face except for when a fight broke out. I ended up being stationed there for 6 months for training and I never had to pay for a drink once. As for the loudmouth person, he ended up breaking his probation. Apparently he was not allowed to drink alcohol during his probation. My man baby of a boss needs me to adopt her. My manager, Wanda, is a director about 5 years younger than me. She's 58. She has been with our employer for over 20 years, is extremely good at what she does, is fiercely loyal to her staff, and possesses a wealth of knowledge and insight about our specific work unit and about government in general. She is also emotionally juvenile, totally self-focused, extremely needy, has never had any kind of a romantic relationship in her life, and her completely perfect parents gave her a completely perfect childhood that left her unable to trust any man outside her own family. I am no expert, but I'd wager that a good psychiatrist could probably get at least 2 or 3 dissertations worth of material out of her. Not that she'd ever consult one, since she is completely perfect. At the time I was hired, Wanda was going through some rough times. She had spent her entire adult life living at home caring for her elderly parents, who were both in fragile health and nearing the ends of their lives, so she was under tremendous stress. I had lost my parents some years previously, and I tend to be the empathetic and nurturing sort. What I didn't realize at that point was just how messed up Wanda was emotionally. I made the huge mistake of trying to be supportive as she dealt with caring for her parents during their final illnesses. I encouraged her to chat about books and theater, invited her to join my husband band and I for a couple of concerts, and even invited her to a family Christmas meal the year her second parent died. Understand, she does have family nearby. She has one brother who she barely tolerates and a sister who she adores. The sister and her husband were out of town that year for Christmas and she didn't want to go to her brother's celebration, so she hinted and hinted until I finally broke down. It made for a fairly awkward gathering, as our family is quite wild and rowdy while she is considerably more classy, and she made no secret of the fact that our typical holiday was not what she was accustomed to, but she continued to hint for more invitations afterward anyway. I have worked very hard since then to ignore the hints, which, several years later, are still being dropped on a near constant basis. On top of that, I have extended no more invitations to family celebrations and have worked with other family members to shift hosting duties elsewhere, because if I am not hosting, then I'm not in charge of the guest list. I have limited outside the office contact to a once-a-year concert and a couple of dinners. My spouse thinks even that is too much, and I don't disagree. However, given that Wanda is my boss, I also don't know quite how to completely exclude her without repercussions. A few weeks ago, she came to my cubicle in a flood of tears with the news that her adored sister is selfishly moving across the country to live closer to her children. She sobbed that she is being abandoned and that I need to adopt her because she won't have any family that she likes in the area anymore. She expects to be included in family gatherings, all concert and theater plans, and also made it clear that she'd like to go with us on vacations. The absolute last thing in the world that I want to do is to adopt my needy, clingy boss and include her in every single non-work activity I engage in. It would unquestionably end my marriage, and quite possibly drive me to suicide. I can't afford to take early retirement, and at my age, I'd never land another job in my profession at my current income. Am I just stuck providing emotional support to this woman until one or the other of us either retires or dies? Am I the a-hole for expecting my boyfriend to pay rent if he moves in with me? This is a doozy. I've been dating Josh for a year. I should say now that I, 24F, don't ever want to be legally married, and Josh, 30 meters, is divorced and doesn't want to remarry. We also live in a place where there is no common law marriage. Still, we want to take things a bit further and we're talking about Josh and his 2 daughters moving in with me. I own a 3-bed 2-bath house in a nice area. Josh rents a 2-bed 1-bath apartment, and his lease is coming up. My mortgage is $1,000 a month, and Josh's rent is $1.4K a month. It was important to me that we would have everything figured out before making the change so that there would be no surprises or disagreements about who pays what. I figured it would be unreasonable for Josh to expect to just live with me for free, especially since I'd be giving up one of my rooms so his daughters could have a room. I suggested that Josh pay $700 a month to me in rent, half of what he is currently paying. I would cover the cost of any home repairs, internet, garbage, etc. Then we would split utilities. Even though there's 3 of them and one of me, I don't mind splitting since that would be about what I'm currently paying, I predict. And since I meal prep once a week, I would just get my own groceries and he could get theirs. When I laid everything out, Josh was very unhappy, and said since it's my house he shouldn't have to pay rent, and that we should split groceries. I told him he was welcome to buy his own house and I would move in with him and happily pay rent, while renting out my own house. He was mad at me because he said he's not in a position where he can buy a house. We can't come to an agreement, so I suggested he just find another apartment. The owners aren't letting him renew, and we could revisit the topic in a year. He's not happy with that either because rent prices have skyrocketed here and 2 bedrooms now go for around $1.8K a month, and he thinks he won't be able to find a place he can afford. I'm a bit frustrated because I feel like $700 a month is a really good deal compared to the likely $1,800 he will have to pay. Since we aren't going to get married or anything, I don't understand why he thinks I would be okay with him living for free with his 2 kids. I'm happy to have romance and companionship, but shared assets and finances are not something I want in life. I don't want to support a man. Ida for expecting my boyfriend to pay rent. Edit. I showed Josh this post and he thinks you all are wrong. So here's some input from him. Leslie makes $120K a year and I make $30K a year. I'm living paycheck to paycheck supporting 2 kids with no help from my ex-wife. It's gotten so expensive here that at this rate I'm not even going to be able to feed my kids soon without going to the food bank. No matter what, they're going to get fed. But it's not fair that she owns a house, and can go on vacations or spend $400 a month getting her hair done when I can't even buy my kids name brand cereal. She shouldn't charge me to live with her because she should understand that I want to be able to spend whatever I can giving my kids the childhood that they deserve. Not for me, but for them. Just 2 hours later update. Thanks Reddit. Oh, you won and I'm glad I posted here. After a very loud and angry argument with Josh, I broke up with him. Despite pretty much everyone telling him he was wrong, Josh insisted that I should basically support the 3 of them because it's what would be best for his kids. He doesn't seem to understand that they aren't my kids and no one is going to want to bankroll the 3 of them. At least no one with a brain. The point is, I'm young, good looking, I own a house. I can do better than a broke single dad who has no education and a shitty job who thinks it's okay to mooch off me and scream in my face when I tell him no. Hope your next girlfriend is stupid enough to put up with you, Josh. No wonder your ex-wife left.